2022 five-star offensive lineman Josh Conerly has committed to the Oregon Ducks. A huge, huge win for Dan Lanning, Adrian Clem, and the rest of the Oregon coaching staff. And we are going to break it all down here on Oregon Football Max Taurus. Thank you guys for tuning into the video. Kindly ask before we get into this for you guys to smash that like button and go ahead and subscribe to the channel. That is a huge help. So with all that being said, let's talk about why this edition is so big for Oregon. First of all, Josh Conerly picks Oregon over USC. He said it in his commitment interview on CBS Sports HQ. He said it was hard to pick Eugene over LA, but ultimately that's what he ended up doing. Conerly was originally working from a top 6 that included schools, obviously Oregon, USC, Miami, Michigan, Oklahoma, and the hometown of Washington Huskies, now being coached by first-year head coach Kalen DeBoer, at least in Washington, who comes over from Fresno State. Another reason this is big for Oregon, Josh Conerly just became the number 8 all-time commit for Oregon, narrowly edging Eric Armstead by 0.01 on the 247 Sports composite rating. So that's pretty crazy. And then also just diving into why this is big for the Ducks, Conerly's commitment gives Oregon a potential plug-and-play option. Conerly is that good. After all, he was the top remaining player in the 2022 recruiting class. And this also, I think, will be a little bit healing to Oregon fans after they lost out on LT Overton, who reclassified from the 2023 class into the 2022 class and recently announced his commitment to Texas A&M after getting out to Oregon for an official visit. Obviously, that relationship with Dan Lanning from his time at Georgia as defensive coordinator played a pivotal role in getting him out to Eugene for a visit. So Conerly, potential plug and play. I'm not going to go as far as saying I think he's going to start in 2022, but he's certainly going to have a good case to maybe make an appearance or two this year in 2022. That is, Ducks return their entire offensive line from a season ago with Alex Forsyth, Ryan Walk, Malisala Amavai-Laulu. Who else do we got? We have Stephen Jones on the offensive line as well. And TJ Bass. Can't forget about TJ Bass, Dawson Jaramillo. So the Ducks are pretty loaded at offensive line as it stands, only losing George Moore from last year, with him exhausting the remainder of his college eligibility during the 2021 season. Another reason this helps Oregon is because they've seen a couple departures via the transfer portal. That is, since Dan Lanning took over, Logan Sagapolu followed Alex Mirabal and Mario Cristobal all the way across the country to Miami. He was a reserve offensive lineman for Oregon, but nonetheless, he was someone that was drawing a lot of praise in spring and fall camp. Maybe he was someone that could have contributed this year or at least got into the rotation. Jalen Jeffers, that's the most recent announcement that came this morning on Friday, that report from On3's Matt Zenitz. And then Jonathan Dennis, the Florida native who battled injuries during his time at Oregon, announced that he would be entering the transfer portal as well after 2 seasons in Eugene. So that's kind of the big picture as far as why there's so much buzz around this, at least with the ratings and how far that goes and the on-field aspect of things. But let's look kind of into the future a little bit. Another reason this is notable is because Josh Conerly is the teammate of Caleb Presley. If you don't know who that is, that's a 2023 highly rated cornerback out of Rainier Beach in the Seattle area. So got to figure that having Conerly on board is certainly going to help give Oregon some ammo with Caleb Presley and that recruitment. That one's going to be super heavily contested. In fact, it already is, with Presley taking a recent trip out to, I believe it was TCU, if I'm remembering that correctly, after FSP went on a 7-on-7 trip out there. Presley's been to Eugene multiple times. I also know that Washington's making him a priority here in the first full recruiting cycle with that new staff out there in Seattle. Texas A&M also got Presley on campus. So just about everybody's going for Presley, but certainly helps that Oregon is working to lock down the Pacific Northwest, which is another point of why I think this is such a big commitment for the Ducks. Let's see what else we have here. With Josh Conerly's commitment, This gives Oregon the number 16 class nationally, according to the 247 Sports ratings. And that also means this is the fourth straight year that the Ducks have finished with the number one recruiting class in the Pac 12. The last time that they didn't finish with the top class in the Pac 12 was 2018 when USC had the top class. And another reason that this really stood out to me is because Oregon gets another top player in Washington. Conerly is the top player in Washington this year, I believe. But the Ducks added Yulee back in February. Dave Yulee, another fellow offensive lineman, also out of the state of Washington over there in Puyallup. So two big bodies coming out from Washington to play for Adrian Clem and the Ducks on the offensive line. And let's pull back the curtain a little bit, because this commitment really, I think, sets the stage for what's setting up to be a massive battle on the recruiting trail for potentially years to come. I'm talking about Dan Lanning versus Lincoln Riley at USC, with Oregon winning this recruiting battle after Conerly chose the Ducks. And it just kind of resonated with me, because you're looking at Josh Conerly, an offensive tackle, offensive lineman, who had the opportunity to play for Lincoln Riley, one of the most highly regarded names in college football, especially highly regarded offensive minds. I mean, you saw what he did at Oklahoma. Those offenses were pretty solid pretty much every year. Last year was a little bit spotty, right, with Spencer Rattler and Caleb Williams kind of splitting time after Rattler lost the job. And then now Caleb Williams has followed Riley to LA, so that's going to be something to watch. But for Conerly to pass on the opportunity to play for Lincoln Riley, one of the best offensive minds in college football, to play for a defensive coach, Dan Lanning, the new head coach at Oregon, I think it says a lot. It says a whole heck of a lot about this new Oregon staff and just how strong of recruiters they are. Even this past week, I remember seeing on my videos and kind of on Twitter, can this new Oregon staff recruit? Is it maybe time to start doubting them a little bit? Where are the results? They got Cole Martin back on January 1st. And then when the month turned, it had been 3 full months since they had gotten a commitment from the 2023 ranks. They'd gotten some transfers since Lanning took over. Sam Taimani, one of them in the trenches. Also have Chase Cota, the UCLA wide receiver transfer, Justice Lowe, wide receiver. So there definitely have been some big commitments. And the Ducks also got Jaleel Florence back in December. So maybe that was the first true recruiting win for Dan Lanning over USC and Lincoln Riley, with him coming on so late. But that wasn't as surprising as this one, in my opinion. That after all, Florence was a former commit to Oregon. He is a corner, so you got to figure that Lanning probably has a little bit of the edge there for defensive players, right? So this is just huge. It's also a massive win for Adrian Clem, who comes down from the NFL after working with the Steelers. Talked to him earlier this week just yesterday, actually, following Thursday's practice. And he was saying that the recruiting game is really one of the biggest changes that he's noticed since coming back to the college ranks after he most recently spent time at UCLA in 2016, I believe it was. So now he and the Oregon staff are managing recruiting. They're managing NIL. They're managing all the different aspects that come with recruiting. Far from a perfect science, as I like to say. And I just think it's huge. It says a lot about Adrian Clem and the rest of that offensive staff. Props to Kenny Dillingham, too, the offensive coordinator for Oregon. And I think if I'm Dan Lanning and I got this job, we rewind things back a little bit, right, to December. I put Conerly right at the top, at least in 2022, right? You have Jaleel Florence, too. He was big as far as defense goes. But guys that they still had a legitimate shot at in 2022, they had some ground to make up with Conerly, no doubt about it. But, with the way that they attacked this, they had multiple staffers that were going and working with him throughout his recruitment. The Ducks got that Oregon official visit, I believe it was mid-March. And then just from a timeline standpoint, he went to USC at the end of March for his final of 5 official visits. So it looked like USC was going to have that final impression, right? The final visit to get to make their pitch and sell themselves. But things got a little interesting because last weekend, Josh Conerly, it was reported by Brendan Huffman, I believe it was, he came back out to Oregon on his own dime, unofficial visit, and the Ducks got the last laugh, the last impression, whatever you want to call it. having the last impression is huge in the recruiting game. Absolutely huge. Doesn't necessarily guarantee that a prospect is going to commit to that school. No, but it's huge. And I don't want to keep repeating myself on that point. So this really sets the stage for, I think, what is years to come of Oregon versus USC recruiting battles. And this should have been a USC versus Oregon recruiting battle, right? If you guys listened to the last episode of the Ducksters podcast, I also just recently uploaded a video on it. I was talking to John Garcia, the director of football recruiting for SI, and he was saying with Conerly being one of the top guys out west, this should have been an Oregon SC battle. Those are two of the premier brands, not necessarily premier programs, at least not with USC recently, but two of the premier brands in college football in the Pac-12 out west. So they should have been in on him. And it's just huge that Oregon was able to close the gap, especially with the late start that they got in the recruiting game, just with the timing not being very favorable after Dan Lanning got hired. But Conerly just goes to show you that having highly touted guys, they can push past those traditional recruiting deadlines, right? Those how we usually see those shaking out. Just realized that I had these highlights up ready to share, but I got a little carried away. So really big. Washington still kind of in shambles over there in Seattle. They're making some noise. They're getting a couple of recruits I saw recently, but they're not getting 5 stars like Josh Conerly. So I know that every time Oregon gets a commit out of the state of Washington that Washington was in on at some point, the Oregon fans like to throw shade at Washington. So I'm sure we'll be seeing plenty of that on Twitter. But one other guy to just other note is the Ducks also picked up a second commitment today in 2023, defensive lineman Tavita Pomoe, excuse me. And that was big because they, like I said, they hadn't gotten a guy since the beginning of January in the class of 2023. So hopefully that's a sign for things to come in 2023 for the Ducks on the recruiting trail. Another big body in the trenches. I think that's really telling too, the fact that Dan Lanning got 2 really great players in the trenches. It looks like he's kind of at least going to be a little similar from the previous staff that we saw at Oregon, working and building the classes from the inside out. And then lastly, the last thing I want to add after the Ducks pick up Conerly, the month of April is crucial because the Ducks are going to have their spring game, April 23rd. That's going to be a star-studded visitor list. We already know that. Jaden Rashada, the 5-star quarterback, is going to be back in town. He's someone to watch for sure. But a lot of these elite programs, their spring games are huge because they get a lot of momentum after that. And it looks like Oregon is setting the stage to kind of pick up momentum at just the right time. I think all the best programs as far as recruiting powers go, they do most of their heavy lifting in the spring, in the summer. That way, when the season comes around, you can not only focus on the on-field product, obviously, but recruiting doesn't stop. You got to keep doing that during the season. So you're bringing back high-profile guys who have already been on campus multiple times, sometimes is even the case. So I think that'll be huge for Oregon because then they'll be able to push ahead even into the 2024 class, depending on how much progress they can make in 2023. But if I've learned anything from covering the recruiting beat for Oregon in recent cycles, it's that staffs typically like to have most of their heavy lifting done by the time the season rolls around. So I don't doubt that that's still going to be the case in the approach for Dan Lanning and the Ducks. But that's all we have for this video, you guys. Ducks picking up steam on the recruiting trail, potentially just at the right time. 5-star offensive lineman Josh Conerly is a Duck.